The file had been sealed for decades. No one inside the palace had opened it in over 30 years. Not ministers, not advisors, not even the royal guard. But one afternoon, the system recorded a new access. It wasn't a senior official, it wasn't a security breach, it was a child. Princess Charlotte had clicked a link while doing a simple school research assignment, and within seconds, a hidden protocol quietly activated, sending a signal to a monitoring office that officially no longer existed. What no one realized at that moment was this: that file was never meant to be read. It was designed to do something far more dangerous. It was designed to reveal who inside the monarchy would move the moment the crown appeared vulnerable. And without knowing it, a 9-year-old girl had just triggered a system built to test loyalty at the highest levels of power. So before we show you what happened next and how the royal guard discovered the truth behind that signal, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Because this story isn't about a mistake, it's about what happens when curiosity accidentally exposes how power really works. The digital security office inside Windsor Castle never looked the way people imagined royal spaces to look. There were no chandeliers, no polished antiques, no portraits watching from the walls, only low white light, quiet air conditioning, and rows of dark monitors reflecting steady lines of data. Sergeant Oliver Hale sat alone at the central console, his red tunic jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair. He wore only his dark service shirt now, sleeves rolled just below his elbows. His posture was straight, even this late in the evening, as if someone could walk in at any moment and expect him to stand at attention. But no one ever did. Most people didn't even know this office existed. To the public, the Royal Guard protected gates, corridors, and ceremonial grounds. They stood still for photographs and parades. Very few knew that a separate division worked in silence, guarding something far less visible: information. Hale's job tonight was simple, routine even, the kind of task he could complete almost without thinking: a weekly integrity audit of the Crown Digital Archive. He tapped through the system methodically, scanning verification logs. Each file category appeared in orderly rows: parliamentary correspondence, diplomatic records, historical documentation, sealed ceremonial protocols. Everything looked exactly as it should, until it didn't. A single entry near the bottom of the screen caught his eye. He didn't react immediately. His training had taught him never to rush conclusions. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, narrowing his gaze as he read the label: Dormant, Succession Stability Protocol. That alone wasn't unusual. The archive contained hundreds of sealed contingency files. Some dated back decades. Many had never been opened at all. What made this one different was the timestamp beside it. Last accessed, 1407. Today. Hale frowned slightly. That couldn't be correct. Files marked dormant were locked behind multiple authorization layers. Yet even senior administrative staff could not open them casually. Access required a rare combination of clearance codes and oversight verification. He assumed it had to be a logging glitch. That happened occasionally during automated system updates. Still, protocol required him to verify. He tapped the file entry and opened the access record panel. The screen shifted, displaying a simple authentication trail: user credential, timestamp, location terminal. Hale's eyes moved down the column slowly, and then stopped. For a moment, he didn't react at all. He simply stared, because the name attached to the access credential didn't belong to any administrator, archivist, or authorized official. It belonged to someone who should never have appeared on this screen at all. User credential: Princess Charlotte of Wales. Hale sat back slightly in his chair, not alarmed, not panicked, just still. He read the line again, as if expecting it to correct itself. It didn't. Princess Charlotte. He exhaled quietly, then rested his hands on the console, thinking through possibilities. A misassigned terminal, an authentication sync error, a software routing mistake. Those explanations would have made sense, except for one detail that made his chest tighten just slightly. The system didn't record errors, it recorded actions, and according to this log, someone had opened a file that had been sealed for decades, and that someone was a 9-year-old girl. Sergeant Hale did not call anyone right away. That was the first rule of internal security: verify before escalating. Most anomalies turned out to be harmless once the full context appeared. And nothing created unnecessary panic faster than reacting too quickly. He kept his breathing steady and opened the detailed access trail. The system displayed the exact terminal used, along with the time sequence of actions. Terminal ID, EDU-PRIV-03. Location, Royal Children's Study Wing. Session, duration, 41 seconds. Hale recognized the terminal immediately. It was one of the educational archive stations installed in the private learning suites. Computers configured specifically for the Royal Children's research assignments. They allowed access to historical materials, constitutional records, and public state documents. But they were not supposed to reach sealed contingency files. That layer was separated by multiple digital firewalls. He scrolled further. The action log showed something simple. In search query, line of succession changes history, subfolder, navigation, Crown Historical Archives, link activation, Crown Stability Reference, restricted. Hale leaned back slightly, his expression calm but focused. It wasn't hacking, it wasn't forced entry, it was navigation. Someone had followed a visible index link, which meant the restricted file had not been fully hidden from the educational archive system. It had only been marked as dormant, and that made what happened next almost painfully easy to imagine. He pictured the scene clearly. Charlotte sitting at her study desk earlier that afternoon, feet not quite touching the floor, reading through archive material for a history assignment. Her tutors often encouraged independent research. She was known for asking detailed questions about how the monarchy changed over time. And a link labeled Crown Stability Reference would have sounded perfectly ordinary to her, even educational. He imagined her clicking it out of curiosity, waiting for a file to load, seeing lines of formal language she didn't fully understand, technical constitutional terms, contingency protocols, structured response codes. Nothing that would make sense to a child. Nothing that would hold her attention. And so she would have done exactly what the log showed next. File open duration, 11 seconds. File closed. Manual exit. She had looked, and then left. Probably thinking it was boring. Probably assuming it was just another old record. She would never have known that anything important had happened. Hale felt a quiet sense of relief at that realization. There was no sign of intentional action. No attempt to bypass controls, just curiosity. Normal, harmless curiosity. He was about to close the log window when something else caught his attention. A secondary entry appeared beneath the access record. Not a user action, a system response. He leaned forward again. The line read, "Mirror protocol activated. External oversight notification sent." Hale's fingers paused over the keyboard. He read it once more slowly. This wasn't part of a normal file access process. Mirror protocols were reserved for a very specific category of system functions, automated alerts designed to duplicate critical signals to backup monitoring structures, and according to the timestamp, the moment Charlotte opened the file, even briefly, the system hadn't just recorded it, it had reacted. Sergeant Hale didn't move for several seconds. He simply watched the line on the screen as if it might change if he waited long enough. It didn't. Mirror protocol activated. External oversight notification sent. The words sat there calmly, without urgency, without flashing alerts. The system wasn't designed to panic. It was designed to observe. That was what unsettled him most. Because mirror protocols were not standard archive features. They existed only in the highest level of contingency systems, the kind created decades ago when the monarchy still operated under Cold War-era constitutional stability planning. He opened the protocol details slowly. The internal documentation appeared in small gray text. Purpose: to duplicate any activation of succession stability files to a remote oversight server tasked with monitoring indicators of constitutional risk. Hale's brow tightened slightly. That server shouldn't even exist anymore. Most of the older oversight mechanisms had been dismantled or absorbed into modern digital security frameworks years ago. Their functions had either been archived or permanently disabled, which meant this protocol should have triggered nothing. At most, it should have logged an internal note and stopped there. But the response log showed something different. Signal transmission, successful. Oversight node. Status, active. Acknowledgement received. Hale felt a small shift in his chest. Not fear, not alarm. Something quieter. Recognition. Because if an acknowledgement had been received, that meant something on the other end was still listening. He quickly ran a trace on the outgoing signal route. The system mapped the path in a simple blue line. It didn't leave the country. It didn't even leave the palace network infrastructure. The signal had traveled only a short digital distance, routed through internal communication layers before terminating at a secure node inside a government-linked oversight cluster. A cluster that, according to official records, had been decommissioned nearly 20 years ago. Hale stared at the trace endpoint. The node ID carried an old institutional designation, Constitutional Stability Monitoring Office. For a moment, he wondered if it was just an archival label that had never been updated. But then another detail appeared on the screen. Oversight node response time, 0.8 seconds. That wasn't the delay of a dormant system waking up. That was the response time of something already running, already waiting. Hale exhaled slowly, and his mind shifting from curiosity into something more precise. Because this meant the protocol had not simply triggered a forgotten archive alert. It had activated an active monitoring structure, one that had never truly been shut down. And then, just as he was about to notify his commanding officer, another system log entry appeared beneath the mirror protocol line. It hadn't been there a moment earlier. Secondary internal access attempts detected. Hale opened the details immediately. A list of administrative terminals populated the screen, each with timestamps only seconds after Charlotte's file access. Senior Household Administration, Private Secretary Communications Office, Legacy Constitutional Liaison Desk, all attempting to open the same file, all within 3 minutes. Hale sat very still, because this changed everything. And Charlotte hadn't just opened a dormant archive file. She had unknowingly triggered a system designed to watch for signs of instability. And the moment that signal fired, people inside the palace had reacted. Quickly, quietly, as if they had been waiting for it. Sergeant Hale did not raise an alarm. He didn't call security command. He didn't send an urgent system flag. And he did not notify general administrative channels. Instead, he followed the protocol reserved for situations that were unclear, but potentially sensitive. He saved the audit snapshot, sealed the activity log under restricted classification, and walked out of the digital security office without a word to anyone else on the night shift. 10 minutes later, he was standing inside a much quieter room, at the private briefing office connected to the Prince of Wales's working suite. Prince William was already there when Hale entered. He stood near the window, hands resting lightly on the edge of the desk, reading from a tablet screen that had been placed in front of him. He didn't look up immediately. "Sergeant Hale," he said calmly, "you requested direct reporting." "Yes, sir." William glanced once at the digital summary on the tablet, then raised his eyes. His expression was not alarmed. It was focused. "Tell me in plain terms," he said. Hale spoke without embellishment. "A sealed Crown Archive contingency file was accessed earlier today. The credential attached belongs to Princess Charlotte. The access duration was brief and appears accidental. However, the file activation triggered a mirror protocol that transmitted a signal to an external oversight node." William's face did not change. He only asked one question. "Did Charlotte know what she opened?" "No, sir." That answer seemed to settle something inside him. William nodded once. "Then this is not a disciplinary matter." Hale remained silent. William set the tablet down slowly and continued in the same calm tone. "No one speaks to her about this. No one implies she did anything wrong. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." A short pause followed. Then William asked, "What concerns you most?" Hale answered immediately. "The oversight node that received the signal is active. It responded within 1 second. That node was officially decommissioned decades ago." William's eyes sharpened slightly. So something is still monitoring these protocols?" "Yes, sir." William walked toward the window, looking out over the dark grounds of the castle. For several seconds he said nothing. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower. "Then we treat this as an investigation, not an incident." He turned back. "Activate communications isolation on this file, quietly, no automated alerts. I want to know who attempted access after the signal fired." Hale nodded. "Understood." "Map internal response patterns," William added. "Every terminal, every administrative request, every reroute attempt." He paused briefly before adding one more instruction. "And Sergeant, this remains inside the Royal Guard chain only." "Yes, sir." William gave a final, steady look. "This is not about a file being opened," he said quietly. Hale understood immediately. And it was about what happened after. As he left the room and returned to the digital security office, the investigation was already taking shape in his mind. Because in the minutes following Charlotte's accidental click, someone inside the palace had reacted fast enough to suggest they already knew what that file represented. And now, the Royal Guard needed to find out why. By midnight, the digital security office no longer felt routine. The monitors still glowed the same soft blue. The air still hummed quietly. But now, every screen displayed layers of internal network activity maps, thin lines showing where signals had moved and how quickly they had been redirected. Sergeant Hale worked methodically, reconstructing the sequence minute by minute. At 14:07, Princess Charlotte had opened the file. At 14:07 and 11 seconds, the mirror protocol activated. At 1408, the oversight node acknowledged the signal, and at 1409, something else began. Administrative terminals across different departments attempted to access the same archive file, not randomly, not slowly, almost simultaneously. Hale isolated the attempts and examined their origins. One came from the private secretariat's constitutional records desk, another from an internal advisory office that dealt with ceremonial succession procedures. A third came from a legacy liaison terminal that had not been used actively in years. None of them succeeded in opening the file. The Royal Guard had already isolated access. But the pattern itself told a much clearer story. These offices had not discovered the alert by accident. They had been notified. Hale opened the internal documentation attached to the Mirror Protocol. Files written decades earlier, long before the current digital systems had been modernized. The language was formal and precise. Protocol purpose: to monitor institutional response alignment in the event of sudden activation of succession stability contingencies. He read the line twice, then once more. It wasn't a warning system. It wasn't designed to prevent crises. It was designed to observe reactions, to measure who moved and how they moved. Hale continued reading. The protocol described a concept known internally as a pressure trigger. Instead of announcing instability openly, the system would simulate the early signal of a constitutional risk scenario. When the signal appeared, their oversight monitors could track which internal offices attempted to take control of communications, redirect authority channels, or secure strategic information flows. In other words, it was never meant to protect the Crown itself. It was meant to expose the networks around it. Hale leaned back slightly, absorbing the implication. Decades ago, when trust between institutions was more uncertain, this system had been created as a silent test, a way to see where loyalty truly rested if the monarchy ever appeared vulnerable. But it had supposedly been dismantled long ago after reforms streamlined oversight structures. Yet the active response logs showed something different. The oversight office tied to this system had never fully disappeared. Its physical department might have been dissolved, but its digital framework had remained quietly intact, maintained, updated, and still listening. Hale's final review of the activity timeline revealed one more detail that settled the matter completely. Each administrative access attempt occurred within seconds of the Mirror Protocol alert. There was no delay for manual communication, no internal emails, no calls. The system itself had notified them directly, which meant those offices were still connected to a monitoring network that officially no longer existed. Hale closed the protocol documentation slowly, because the truth was now unmistakable. Princess Charlotte had not simply opened a forgotten archive file. She had unknowingly activated a dormant test designed to reveal which parts of the institution would move the moment the Crown appeared unstable. And the response pattern showed that even after all these years, some people were still watching for that moment. By early morning, the digital security office had shifted into a different kind of silence. Not the calm, routine quiet it usually carried, but the focused stillness that came when everyone in the room understood they were looking at something delicate. No one spoke loudly, no phones rang. Every communication moved through secured internal channels. Sergeant Hale sat at the center console, studying a layered network map that now filled the largest screen on the wall. Thin lines connected different administrative departments, each line marking a reaction after the Mirror Protocol had fired. He began isolating the movements, not what people said, but what they tried to do. The first pattern appeared quickly. Several senior administrative offices had attempted to reroute internal communications traffic within minutes of the alert. They weren't sending messages outward. They were trying to control how information moved inside the palace network. One office had attempted to restrict access to succession planning records. Another tried to secure priority contact lines normally reserved for constitutional advisors. A third attempted to open a private channel to a government liaison system that had not been active in routine operations for years. None of these actions were illegal. None were classified as hostile. But together, they formed a clear picture. They were moves of preparation. Moves that would only make sense if someone believed a serious constitutional event had just occurred. Hale highlighted the activity clusters and sent the mapped report to Prince William's private terminal. Less than 10 minutes later, he was called back to the same quiet briefing room. William stood near the table again, reading the network diagram in silence. He didn't appear surprised, only thoughtful. "These aren't random reactions," he said after a moment. "No, sir," Hale replied. "They show coordination patterns." William nodded slowly. "They're not trying to harm the institution," he said. "They're trying to position themselves inside it." Hale understood the distinction. This wasn't a security threat in the traditional sense. It was a structural reality. For decades, different administrative branches had developed internal authority networks, lines of influence that could activate quickly if uncertainty appeared. Not because they were disloyal, but because they were trained to ensure continuity. Still, something about the pattern concerned William. He rested his hand lightly on the table and spoke quietly. "This system wasn't protecting the crown," he said. "It was monitoring who would move to control it." Hale remained still. William looked back at the diagram once more. "And the fact that it still functions means someone chose to keep it alive." He didn't sound angry, only certain. "Trace the oversight node maintenance logs," he instructed. "I want to know who kept this network operational." "Yes, sir." As Hale turned to leave, William added one final thought, more to himself than to anyone else. "The monarchy should never need a hidden system to test loyalty," he said softly. "Because loyalty, in its pure form, was supposed to be visible without triggers. But this system had been built on a different assumption, that when power appeared uncertain, people would reveal where they truly stood. And now, because of one innocent click by a curious child, those invisible lines had been exposed." 2 days later, the palace had returned to its usual rhythm. Corridors carried the soft sounds of routine again. Distant footsteps, quiet conversations between staff, the steady movement of daily schedules unfolding without interruption. Nothing outwardly suggested that anything unusual had happened, especially not in the children's study wing. Princess Charlotte sat at her desk near the tall window, sunlight falling across her notebooks. A history textbook lay open in front of her, filled with colored tabs marking different chapters. As she leaned forward slightly, reading with the serious focus that always came when she wanted to understand something fully. Her tutor sat nearby, watching her work. "Do you remember what we discussed yesterday?" the tutor asked gently. Charlotte nodded. "Yes," she said. "That the line of succession changed many times before it became stable. And why did it change? Because rules were different, and sometimes people didn't agree about who should lead." She paused, then added thoughtfully, "It sounds very complicated." The tutor smiled faintly. "History often is." Charlotte looked down at her notebook again. "I tried to find more about it in the archives," she said casually, "but some of the files were very hard to understand." The tutor didn't think much of the comment. Many archive documents were written in formal language that even adults found difficult. "That's normal," she replied. "Some records are meant more for specialists." Charlotte nodded and returned to her reading. From the corridor outside, Sergeant Hale stood quietly at his usual observation post. He wasn't watching her directly. His gaze rested neutrally along the hallway, exactly as protocol required. But he was aware of her presence, and of how completely normal she seemed. There was no sign in her posture, no hesitation in her voice, nothing in her behavior that suggested she knew anything beyond a simple research session. To her, the moment she had opened the archive file had lasted less than a minute. An ordinary act of curiosity, a small click during a school assignment. She would never know that it had set off a chain of quiet activity across multiple layers of the institution. Behind the scenes, the Royal Guard Cyber Division had already completed their final actions. The oversight node tied to the old monitoring system had been permanently disconnected, its internal servers archived and sealed. The legacy office that once maintained it had been formally dissolved, not publicly, but administratively. No announcement, no documentation accessible outside restricted records. Just a silent restructuring. Prince William had signed the final authorization himself. The system would never activate again. Hale knew all of this. But as he stood in the corridor, listening to the calm murmur of Charlotte's lesson continuing inside the study room, none of it seemed visible anymore. Only one simple reality remained. And to Charlotte, nothing had changed. She had opened a file, found it confusing, closed it, and moved on with her day. Hale watched the sunlight shift slowly across the floor outside her door, and he understood something clearly. Sometimes the greatest form of protection was not preventing danger. It was making sure that a child never had to know how close it had come. The final review meeting took place in the same quiet briefing room where the investigation had first begun. No large table, no formal audience, only a small group of senior Royal Guard leadership seated with their tablets, each reviewing the last sealed report. Sergeant Hale stood near the wall, hands loosely behind his back, as Prince William read the concluding summary in silence. The findings were simple, and the Legacy Oversight Network had remained active for years without full institutional awareness. It had continued to monitor contingency triggers tied to constitutional stability files. Its purpose had not been sabotage, nor protection. It had been observation. A system designed decades earlier to answer a single question: who would move if the crown appeared vulnerable? William closed the report slowly and rested his hand on the table. For several seconds no one spoke. Then he said quietly, "We've removed the system." A senior guard officer nodded. "Yes, sir, the node has been permanently sealed." Another added, "All related administrative access channels have been disconnected." William listened, then shook his head slightly. "That's not the most important part." The room remained still. He looked up. "The most important part is why it existed in the first place." No one answered. "Because everyone already understood." William continued in a calm, measured voice. "Decades ago, people believed the crown needed hidden systems to measure loyalty. Systems that watched in silence and waited for instability." He paused. "But any structure that requires secret triggers to reveal its strength is already fragile." His gaze shifted briefly toward Hale. "And what happened this week proved something very clear." He spoke the final line quietly. "The systems we build to protect power should never be stronger than the ones we build to protect people." The words settled into the room without resistance. There was nothing more to add. The meeting ended shortly after. No statements were issued. No records beyond restricted archives were filed. The institution had corrected itself in the only way it knew how: quietly, without spectacle. Later that afternoon, Sergeant Hale returned to the digital security office. The monitors once again displayed ordinary system logs, routine archive checks, stable network activity, nothing unusual. It looked exactly the same as it had before the investigation began. As he completed the final audit confirmation, a small notification appeared on his internal communications screen. Maintenance request. Children's Study Terminal, EDU-PRIV-03. User note: computer was slow earlier this week. Hale allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. He walked to the study wing to inspect the terminal. Charlotte was standing nearby when he entered, hands folded neatly behind her back. "Oh," she said, recognizing him. "Are you here to fix it?" "Yes." Ma'am," he replied gently. She watched as he checked the system settings, his movements calm and precise. After a moment, she said quietly, "Thank you for helping the other day." Hale paused slightly. "You're welcome." She hesitated, then added, "I didn't know some files could make computers act strange." "They can," he said simply. Charlotte nodded, satisfied with the explanation. To her, it was nothing more than a technical issue, a slow system, a confusing document, something an adult had quietly fixed. She turned back toward her books without another thought. Hale completed the maintenance check and stepped back into the corridor. As he resumed his post, the castle around him moved with its usual calm certainty. Most people inside its walls would never know what had happened. They would never know that a hidden system had once been waiting, not for enemies, but for signs of weakness within the institution itself. And they would never know that it had been exposed, not by politics, not by conflict, but by a child's simple curiosity. Because in the end, the greatest threat to the crown had not been instability. It had been the quiet assumption that power needed to be watched more closely than people, and it had taken one accidental click to prove that assumption wrong. If you were in Sergeant Hale's position, would you have reported the incident immediately, or protected the child first and investigated quietly? And if a system designed to test loyalty still existed in secret, do you think it should have remained hidden or removed the moment it was discovered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you never miss our daily uploads. You can also share this story with someone who enjoys realistic royal and institutional dramas. And while you're here, another video is already on your screen. Tap it now and continue watching. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new story.